as we think about engagement for the SAM and what we need to do overall, there is a process that we like to go through because things have become so complicated and there's so many ways to get stories out there. It's pretty simple, and most people have the same, every agency has a very similar process overall. It starts with the goal. What is the opportunity? And we like to say opportunity because it's something that we can identify, both as communications professionals, seeing the outside opportunity for an organization, and what the client or the organization identifies. What are their goals? What are their business goals? What are their mission overall that they want to achieve upon, and how do we identify that opportunity together? Then determine the strategy, so do your research, your discovery, talk to people, look at what's out there overall, narrow that strategy down, and then we like to think that we can get that down to one point that we call the insight, and it's spelled that way for a reason, because it's what is the strategy that is going to incite engagement? What is going to create a situation where people want to participate and really start to engage? Then you get into the platform, which is really the idea. We say the creative, but it's really what is the idea that will then incite, and then how do we engage with that idea over and over again. And the one thing that I really want to focus on is which I would call the insight wheel overall. So this is the way that we really categorize the research, and as you listen to Sandra, these are the questions I really want you to start asking yourself overall. And so it starts at the bottom, and that is in the category, what is going to succeed in this marketplace? So who is the SAM comparing itself to? What is the competition for mind share overall? It might not be necessarily a competitive set in this space, but what are the other distractions for the audience that you need to compete against, and what is going to win in that category? Is the organization, the next thing up on the left, what is core to their story that they really want to tell and make sure is differentiating in that marketplace overall? What do we need to get across? That's really the essence of the SAM. Audience, who is the audience? What is it that they care about? And then what about that can we relevantly help them solve? So what is the challenge, the problem, the desire that they have that we can play into and actually help them move closer towards? Then, of course, culture and context is what's going on in the broader environment. So what are trends that are happening that can make this seem more relevant, that we can play into? And then the connection part is, okay, what is the best way to connect overall? And that can be both what's true to them, so what is it, the ways they want to be engaged, but then also in terms of the channels and the types of content that you want to be delivering over and over again. Before I hand it over, I think the one question I would ask everybody to think about as you're listening to Sandra is, if I could build that next generation of a publishing platform, if I could build that channel for the SAM, whose goals are about creating lifelong arts education in the Seattle area, I believe, what would that be? What is the stories that we could tell? What is the stories? What are the stories?
So we're really looking at these kinds of things. How can SAM be, or our sites, we have 3 sites, how can they be dynamic? How can they foster the exchange of ideas? How can we be instigators of incredible experience that are both about art and the world, that encourage an ecosystem? It's not all about SAM. It's about driving traffic to anything that is amazing around this city, whether it has to do with global health or world issues or art and culture, because we recognize that art and culture is at the center of all of that. So it's really shifting people's minds that the museum isn't a repository, but it's actually an igniting place. It's an incubator. The project that I think is going to be important to you guys is this artist, LaToya Ruby Frazier, who is working both in New York and Braddock, Pennsylvania. And she's looking at the history of Braddock and how Levi Strauss and Carnegie have actually used Braddock as either a workplace where people and polluted the land and ripped it and these are in her words, ripped it and kind of pulled away all the resources from that community, or used it as a campaign for a new frontier to sell Levi's and not give back to the community. So these are pictures that she's taken over the last 16 years of her life of the decline of a community that started with 20,000 people and now is down to 2,000. It's about a 15-block radius of a city. And the city is composed of a really interesting and diverse population. However, many of the people are dying from terminal illness. And the adjacent community has now the main hospital There was a hospital in this community when the population was bigger, and they took away the hospital and they put it in another city, in Pittsburgh. So these folks have to travel long distances even though they've gotten more ill. So she's interested in how her city, how the city she grew up in that does not have an elementary school, that had a high school, actually could be a node of activity and discussion for what is happening in the healthcare industry. So she's interested in art as a vehicle for change. So when I'm talking about that personal and institutional, here's an artist that's deploying her work and her vision for communicating with the world using social documentary photography and placing it in a larger institution or in public institutions for so that that institution can participate in something extremely personal.
The key is to get people to see themselves within that museum, to see, you know, if you're talking about Braddock, then you bring in students who talk about their own neighborhoods that have declined, and no matter where they are, whether it's South Seattle or North Seattle or other parts of the state. But I think there's always that thing where people have to identify with what they're seeing inside that institution in order to connect and feel like they matter and that it's interesting to them.
And it's interesting with that sort of story about this town and kind of making a museum more of kind of a point of nexus where it's like, it's a wormhole like for time and also space. So it's kind of interesting associating, like trying to break, or I guess the opportunity is try to break this concept of a museum being an archive and it kind of being a hub in a way for real time, this concept of real time conversation and history that is like basically being made like today and now.
People connect museums as boring, or just they just want to come look at it and go. So I think museums, in this case, it should be projected as a engaging and interesting venue for people to come and learn fun things.
But the concept of my Sam, like this is my Seattle Art Museum, this is what I come to here for, and having whatever the demographic you're trying to reach at that point, having videos of people like that saying, welcome to my Sam, here's how I use the museum, here's how I learn, here's how I become culturally, emotionally, actively involved in these artifacts, in these images, in anything that's there, but this is my place.
Use that as the ethos of Seattle. Who is Seattle? So if you have an exhibit like this where you're, where you've got an environmental disaster that's being documented by this artist, what's going on here? Like, how can you tie it, for instance, to the coal trains that they're talking about bringing through? How can you tie it to, the destruction of forests in the Northwest, and sort of going into that ethos? Or with a different artist that you might be showcasing, use a similar thing and use the racial issues, which could also be relevant for this. Anything that sort of ties into what's happening in the city, so the people in the city understand and can relate to it. And it's not necessarily bringing the people into the museum, but bringing the museum out to them.
And in this case, the audience would be, a group of people who are, across ages and different other segments of the population, but who are interested in sort of revitalizing communities. And I think here in the Seattle area, that's very relevant. A lot of people would be interested.
Engage people physically at the SAM that mainly you wouldn't think of it being that sort of conversation being in a museum.
The ways that we can engage are so broad and diverse, and it's really about executing the ones that you really believe in that can get the right message across and build that story together. And I guess that's the one thing I've asked everybody to take away from this is, how do you build the story with other people involved? So concerning another organization that you can bring into it, are there people that you can make a part of that? What is the event that you can create? What is the story that you're going to have at the end of that together? And being really intentional about that will actually propel that much further. That's the key to that type of engagement overall.